Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. For this month's tier list, we are going to be ranking the directors we want to see or could possibly direct a Star Wars movie in the future. This is always a fun one to speculate around who could actually direct a Star Wars movie. So it's a little bit of a different tier list today. Before we do so, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Comment below, let us know what you think. Who are your top 5 most wanted directors for a Star Wars movie? So let's get into the tier list. And first, let's look at the tiers here, because what we want to do is kind of isolate this in a vacuum. Anything is possible with a little bit of a sense of realism. Up top, a match made in heaven. To me, that is a pairing between Star Wars and one of these directors that, if it were to ever happen, it could just be perfect. Next is a good fit and actually could happen. This is maybe somebody we think who might actually be able to take on the role of Star Wars, could actually make a pretty great Star Wars movie, but maybe not somebody who's one of our dream directors, like in that top tier. The next level is could work but won't ever happen. These are the ones where we play a little bit of the realism game. Who are some people that might make a really cool Star Wars movie but are probably never going to get involved in Star Wars? And then we have not an exciting choice. These would be people who we could actually see directing a Star Wars movie, but if they were announced, we wouldn't be jumping for joy. Then the second to last tier is stylistically not a good fit. These could be excellent directors, some of the best directors working, but they might make movies that are completely different from the style or tone of a Star Wars movie, and we don't see them fitting too well. Finally, no. These are people we don't really want anywhere near Star Wars. All right, let's get into the tier list here. And we're starting off with somebody that maybe a lot of you don't know, but you probably know his work. And that's Alex Garland, a writer turned director who has recently directed Ex Machina, Annihilation, Men, which was and Civil War, which was kind of a return to form for him. Personally, I added him purely based on his sci-fi efforts. Ex Machina, I thought was fantastic. He worked with 2 Star Wars sequel actors, and I think Annihilation is such an underrated sci-fi movie. I absolutely loved Annihilation, and Natalie Portman's in that, another Star Wars actor. I see Alex Garland as a good fit and could happen. Maybe some of his more recent efforts might temper my full excitement about this choice, but I think because his sci-fi work has been so good, I would be pretty excited if they announced him as a Star Wars director.
Yeah, I think he'd be a pretty good fit with something like an Alexander Freed as like a writer, like military sci-fi. Do I think that he has any interest in Star Wars? Not really. I would say could work, but probably won't ever happen. Next, we have Alfonso Cuarón. You guys all know him from Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Children of Men, Gravity, and Roma. He really gets into characters. He really gets the emotions super well. I think it could be a good fit because I think he'd be really good at handling some fantastical. He can kind of do anything. He's a jack of all trades when it comes to like jumping between genres. I think it could happen. If this could be the one franchise that might be able to pull him back, and if he gets to have like a lot of say.
To me, this is a match made in heaven. I love Alfonso Cuarón's work, especially his sci-fi work. Children of Men is one of the best sci-fi movies of all time. It's a masterpiece. Most of his sci-fi is a little bit higher level, but he has done some children's films and did Harry Potter, which means he's worked in the studio system before. One of the best Harry Potter movies, like top 2 Harry Potter movie for almost anybody you talk to.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Next up, we have somebody who's been in the directing circuit a lot recently, and that's Andy Muschietti. Andy Muschietti did The Flash most recently, and that was a very unfortunate movie. But he also did It, and that's really where he blew up. He is already tied to Batman, the Brave and the Bold, which is going to be the first Batman movie in the DCU. I could see this happening. He's been working in the studio system. This is a guy that if he knocks it out of the park with Batman Brave and the Bold, I could see him showing up in other big high profile franchises. But personally, I would say he's not an exciting choice unless he kills it with Batman Brave and the Bold. There's been enough misses where I wouldn't be over the moon, but I could see it happening. I just would say not an exciting choice.
Yeah, I have a lot of the same feelings. I still really like It Part 1 quite a bit. I think it was handled really well. Flash was not good. When he hits it at the park, it seems like he's got something there. I would also say it's not an exciting choice. Next up, we have Bong Joon-ho, and I mean, this guy's got a crazy resume. His Memories of Murder, Parasite, one of the greatest Korean directors ever, if not the greatest. The one thing that kind of holds me back is that I wasn't a huge fan of Snowpiercer. I think a lot of the messaging and everything was potent. I didn't necessarily love what I saw though. I think if Mickey 17's great, I think it's a match made in heaven. Otherwise, I'm gonna say it's a good fit and it could happen.
I'm on a similar track with you, but I was still going to go match made in heaven. Just the fact that 3 of his last 4 movies have been sci-fi movies do add to the fact that he could possibly do a Star Wars movie. I never once heard him say, "Oh, yeah, I wanna do a Star Wars movie," but he doesn't seem like one of the pretentious type of elite directors. I would say match made in heaven. And next up, we have Bryce Dallas Howard. Now, Bryce Dallas Howard has only directed 1 feature film, and that was a movie called Dads, but she has been one of the most consistent presences in Star Wars directing for TV. She's directed episodes of The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, Skeleton Crew. She's been on everything and directed a lot of really good episodes. But unfortunately for me lately, she hasn't been really hitting it out of the park with her last couple episodes. Mandalorian season 3, it was the Jack Black episode, but she killed it in Book of Boba Fett. I'd prefer to see her do some type of feature film first. I love that she has a lot of experience directing TV, directing Star Wars. It would personally not be an exciting choice as of now.
I'm a little bit more optimistic on her. I would say it could work, but won't ever happen. And the won't ever happen is, again, like you said, dependent on her making another film and one that's outside of the Disney apparatus. She's super good at like connecting with her cast. I think that is not an issue at all. I think she's one of those people with how well she regarded she is in Star Wars and how long she's been working on Star Wars with all different types of cast members. She'd be good fit, could work, but won't ever happen. I honestly think they'd go for her as like a showrunner first before they go in for movies. Like I think this
Yeah.
is her lane right now. She has to almost prove herself outside of it and then come back for more.
I feel like she's part of the Star Wars family. Like, if they had a spin-off or something, a smaller Star Wars project, I could see her getting her dad is a director, she's directed a bunch of stuff, she knows Favreau and Filoni. I could see her getting bumped up because Filoni's never directed a film that wasn't animated,
Yeah.
and he's getting bumped up.
Okay, I'll give you not an exciting choice. Next up, we have Christopher McQuarrie of Mission Impossible fame these days. This would be the guy who would bring Tom Cruise into Star Wars. I love his action. I think he handles it so well. I could say good fit, and it could happen.
I agree. I think it's a good fit and it could happen. He could, if they wanted to do a hyper stylized or even just a nice, pacey action movie, he could definitely do that. It would be a breath of fresh air. Next up, we have most people's dream choice to direct a Star Wars movie, and I'm just going to throw it in match made in heaven, and that's Christopher Nolan. I mean, Christopher Nolan has worked in the studio system. He still works in the studio system, but he's gotten away from obviously non-original project. Christopher Nolan is somebody who's not pretentious. That's what I love about Christopher Nolan. He's somebody who is often accredited Star Wars as an inspiration for him. This would be a long shot, but maybe he gets the itch one day if Star Wars hits a peak and they're just have the cachet to get somebody like a Nolan because everything they make is so great. I could see him fulfilling maybe a childhood dream and directing a Star Wars movie one day. I would say match made in heaven and he would go to the top.
Yeah, I have all the same feelings. I mean, he knows where to use CGI to enhance the practical, which I think is something that is a match made in heaven. Next up, we have the Coen brothers, Ethan and Joel. A lot of weird ones, but like weird in the best ways. You give them a film where it's just an all alien cast or something, where they kind of just have to like deal with like uprisings or like some societal upheaval or like some weird like solar system issues or something going on. So I think they'd absolutely cook with that. So I would say it could work, but won't never happen.
I would too. This is never, ever, ever gonna happen, even in my wildest dreams. And I think they could make a really fun movie for sure. They're creative enough and absolutely could. Next up is Damien Chazelle, and this is a newer name. Obviously, he's done some incredible movies like Whiplash, La La Land. Damien Chazelle is a really interesting auteur. He's a young filmmaker. I don't really see this one happening either, but he's young enough to where, like, if he loved Star Wars, like, secretly, and he really wanted to do one, he could do it, and it would be a great fit because he's a fantastic filmmaker.
He can work on smaller mid-budget level actors who are about to break out. So I think he could handle it. Could work, but won't ever happen. Next up, we have Danny Boyle. He's actually one of my favorite directors outside of Slumdog. I don't think Star Wars under Disney is going to be anything that he'd be appealed to. I just don't think stylistically he's a good fit. I think he'd be pretty low for me.
See, I would disagree on stylistic because I think he's done enough variety to where, like, I think he could handle something like this. He hasn't done any type of like mega blockbuster, but I want to see what he does with 28 Years Later because that movie looks amazing. But the fact that he's done Zombie, which is kind of horror sci-fi, and Sunshine, which is an underrated sci-fi movie. So he has done sci-fi and he's done sci-fi adjacent. So I think he could absolutely handle it. I think he could actually do a good job if he made one. Next up is Darren Aronofsky, another director who has done quite a bit of sci-fi and sci-fi adjacent, has a very distinct style. Aronofsky, people forget that at one point he was attached to Batman. He was supposed to do Batman prior to Christopher Nolan doing Batman Begins. So this is somebody who's not opposed to taking a studio job in a big franchise. That being said, it didn't happen. He's never once looked at this again. I would say this could work, but it won't ever happen.
I think he loves the psychological so much to a point that Star Wars would be afraid of that. I'm not saying that you can't make, like, rated M or R, Star Wars films ever. I just don't see how you would, like, tone him down without losing the essence of who he is. I would say stylistically not a good fit.
I think he could make a really cool Star Wars movie if you were being experimental, but the fact is that he does make really hard-edged movies,
Yeah.
and I don't see that working in Star Wars. So I'll give you that one.
Next up, we have David Fincher. If anything, this is the guy who clearly does not wanna return to working to studios after his debut being Alien 3. I would personally love it if he does, like, a film about a singular character, right? Like, just to dive into their psychology and then some of the situations they've thrown themselves into. I would say could work, but won't ever happen.
I'd agree, and it's purely because of Alien 3. He's always said that he'll never go back, and he could do an amazing, like, adaptation or live action version of something like Coruscant Nights, but it's never gonna happen. Next up, we have David Leitch. David Leitch is a name that you might have heard of or might not have, but he's directed a lot of movies recently. He's similar to a Sean Levy to me, where he does pop culture action movies. He's done Atomic Blonde, Deadpool 2. He was one of the co-creators of John Wick. He did Hobbs and Shaw, Bullet Train, The Fall Guy. All his movies are fun to, at worst, just mediocre, but none of his movies I've absolutely loved when he's directed them. Personally, I would say it's not an exciting choice as of now, but I would not be shocked if he ever got announced as one.
I don't think he really digs in as much as he could. He's more about the spectacle than he is about the substance at times. So not worried about his action. Not a super exciting choice for me. So maybe top of that list. Next up, we have David Lowery. Obviously, it's great that he did Skeleton Crew. He got to have a couple episodes there, which I thought were pretty solid and all. If he goes for something that's closer to the Green Knight, I would be pretty pleased with that. Good fit and could happen just because, Skeleton Crew just gets him a little bit over the hump for me.
I do love all his indie stuff though, and all his indie stuff has been really good. A Ghost Story is super weird. He's had such a strange career where he's done these really traditional studio-based movies or these really interesting, different, weird indies. I'd be cool with bumping him up to good fit and could happen. Well, I get another one of the most high-profile directors who I'm sure everybody has on their dream project for Star Wars, and that's Denis Villeneuve. He's one of the best sci-fi directors of all time. If he just quit today, he'd be one of the best sci-fi directors of all time. I'd love to see him tackle Star Wars. It would be really different. It would obviously be he would be the type of person that would be absolutely perfect to put in charge of building out like the old republic. For me, he's a match made in heaven.
Yeah, I mean, he goes to a match made in heaven for me as well. He kinda goes for a little bit more mature storytelling, mature source material. He's someone that seems to have, like, enough sway with studios that, like, when he works with them, he's like, "This is what I need." He needs to be kinda, like, in control of certain elements to be a match made in heaven for me. So next up, we have Edgar Wright. He was the original director attached to Ant-Man. Did not happen. I think he's an exciting choice, but I don't think it'll ever happen, especially because of experiences with Ant-Man.
Ant-Man just ended so badly that I don't see him working not only with that same studio. Baby Driver was fairly high budget and he did a great job with that. So maybe he could return one day if convinced, but I think he's so focused on his original projects and he makes such great original projects. I see his career going that way, but I would love to see him do a Star Wars movie. Next up, we have George Miller. George Miller, who's almost 80, might not have too much time to direct a Star Wars movie before he officially retires. But the one thing that gets me thinking that he could work, not just in the studio system, because he obviously did with Mad Max 4 and 5, but could work with Disney specifically, is the fact that he was going to make a Justice League movie for a long time. I think George Miller could make an awesome Star Wars movie. I would say because of his age, it won't ever happen.
I think he's a good fit and it could happen. It would just have to like start now. He'd pull out some crazy stunts for sure, but it'd almost have to be like something like the Phasma novel where it has to be almost Mad Max inspired. It has to be almost like how far can you push civilization? I'd say good fit, could happen. Next up, yeah, Greta Gerwig, someone who's got a lot of power and sway despite a relatively like small catalog of films that she's directed. Now, do I think she's a great fit for Star Wars? I don't know, honestly. It's a good fit. It could happen, and we have to kinda definitely see how Narnia plays out on Netflix.
Yeah, that's the big one for me is seeing how Narnia does, but I was absolutely going to say could fit and could happen. She seems to be somebody who's shifting more into the studio system after being such a big presence in the indie circuits. I could see her absolutely doing a Star Wars movie. Next up is Guillermo del Toro, somebody who's not a stranger to big budget sci-fi fantasy. He has done kind of everything when it comes to fantasy creature, and we know he was in talks to do Star Wars with a Jabba the Hutt movie, which I think would have been really interesting and different. I'd still be down for the Jabba the Hutt movie, but I'd prefer to see him do something else. I think this is a match made in heaven. I think he already has interest in Star Wars, so I'd put him in that top tier.
I'm a little bit more mixed on Guillermo, not because of his, what he's done, but more of like what he hasn't or what he's kind of left to other people's devices. He was attached to The Hobbit when it was a duology, and if he did something in Star Wars, for me, I kind of want him to do something that is a duology or a trilogy. I say he's probably for me the top of a good fit and could happen.
But I do think out of almost everyone we've talked about in these top 2 tiers, he is, to me, one of the most likely to have this actually happen, considering he was already so close to having a Star Wars movie made.
I just don't want the Jabba film. That's all something else. Do something
It
entirely original.
I feel like the Jabba film is closer than ever now with Rhoda coming back. The Hutts are coming back strong. I would not be shocked if they announced the Jabba movie.
Next up, we got James Cameron. If we're talking about blockbusters, this is guy's an easy, easy pick. I don't think he's gonna have any time before he retires because he's absolutely devoted to the Avatar sequels right now. But if you told him, hey, go wild, do some creative mocap, do a trilogy, it would be insane. I wouldn't question anything he would do. I think it's a good fit and could happen, but because of the Avatar films on deck, I'll say could work, but probably won't ever happen.
Yeah, I would say it probably won't ever happen as well, but I feel like if we're putting George Miller up and good fit and could happen, then I would put James Cameron up there as well, purely just because I think age is the biggest reason it won't ever
Yeah.
happen. But if we're saying age is not really an object for somebody like George Miller, I think James Cameron, like you said, already has a relationship with Disney, seems to be working really well with them. And I'll give one other reason why I think it could happen. Avatar, he's re-released it a million times to get to the top of the box office. What box office record does he not hold and is not close to holding? The domestic box office record set
Yeah.
by The Force
Yeah.
Awakens. If he did episode 10, he could reclaim that record. Next up, we have James Gunn. James Gunn would make an awesome Star Wars movie. He would make a really fun, entertaining Star Wars movie. He's already used Star Wars kind of as an inspiration for the thing that made him James Gunn. But there is one big logic reason why this will never happen, and it's the fact that he's now head of DC Studios. So unless he gets fired, this is never going to happen.
That's where I'd put him too. It is because he's the head now. All right, next up we have James Wan. I'm not like really ever super impressed by his aesthetics. I did like what how Aquaman 1 looked, but I don't know if I'm like really into a lot of his stuff. I would say not an exciting choice.
I'd agree, not an exciting choice. If they did a horror movie, it would be an exciting choice to me. Well, next up, we have John Krasinski, who is another up and coming director, somebody who's been a part of the industry for a long time, obviously from The Office, but has done A Quiet Place 1 and 2, and then just did If. I never got to see If, but I am a big fan of both A Quiet Place movies. I think they have great tension, great tone. As of now, I'd like to see him do one other type of movie that was a little closer in tone for Star Wars for me to get too excited if they announced John Krasinski, but he'd be really close to like good fit and could happen.
Yeah, I think he falls exactly like where Bryce Dallas Howard is for me. He's still acting, right? He was on that Jack Ryan show for a good bit there too. We don't really know if he's going to try to lean into one direction or the other. Next up, we have John M. Chu. I don't know if he's stylistically a good fit. I know Wicked 1, people loved it. I just don't know if anything that is in these 2, 3 films here that makes me go like, "Oh man, I'd be excited to see him." I think I just need to see more films from him and more variety.
Yeah, I would say not an exciting choice right now just because of that. I mean, I think his stock is at an all-time high with Wicked. I really enjoyed Wicked. I wasn't on the like Wicked hype train like everybody else, where I thought it was a really good movie, but it is the first half of the story. I'm waiting to see how the second half lands, but I enjoyed the experience. I think he has a promising career ahead, and I would imagine he wants to step away from musicals at some point. But I think I would put him at the top of not an exciting choice. Next up, we have Jordan Peele, who is similarly beginning his career as a director, but has been around obviously film and the comedy space for a long time with Key and Peele, but then did Get Out, Us, and Nope. All horror movies, although Nope did transition into kind of horror sci-fi and it had a lot of comedy in it. I do think he is one of the most talented directors working today, just everything from writing to the visual standpoint, the way he casts. I think he's a fantastic filmmaker and somebody who could be really exciting if you picked him for a Star Wars project. So I would say good fit and could happen.
I think Get Out just kinda speaks for itself. It was such a cultural phenomenon. Not a fan of Us. I turned out to be a much bigger fan of Nope, though. I just need to see something different outside of horror from him. Next up, we have Joseph Kosinski. I think he's a good fit. And after Top Gun: Maverick, yeah, I think he can handle it. I think he needs to have a really experienced writer to bring out the best of his sensibilities. I might actually have to throw him into could work but won't ever happen.
See, I was just gonna put him in not an exciting choice just purely because I think he absolutely could make a Star Wars movie. From his filmography, the only thing that I've really, really liked is Top Gun Maverick. I think if they announced it today, I wouldn't be like, yes, Joseph Kaczynski's making a Star Wars movie, but he could make a good one. Next up, we have Lee Isaac Chung. Lee Isaac Chung came on the scene with the Oscar nominated film Minari, but then recently just did Twisters, which bumped him up into, the blockbuster range. That was a hugely successful film in the United States. And then he has also directed multiple episodes from Star Wars, The Mandalorian, and just did Skeleton Crew. Similar to Bryce Dallas Howard, he's been a part of Star Wars, but with his experience doing something like Twisters, I would put him at the bottom of good fit and could happen.
I would put him also in good fit and could happen. The experience with Star Wars always helps. I think he's got it. If he gets one more big success, I think he shoots up to the top of the list just because of that working relationship already with Disney. We have Luca Guadagnino. He's done Call Me by Your Name, Challengers. I like a lot of his work. I really do. Do I think he's a Star Wars director? I think he could do it. It would just be a very hyper focused niche film and I don't think you're gonna get that out of a movie. Really like him a lot, but I think he's not a good fit.
I agree. Stylistically, not a good fit. His movies are all very stylized. He has a very specific style. And I think a lot of directors, when you do Star Wars, you can have stylized Star Wars movies, but they kind of have to fit the action sci-fi genres. You can go so experimental that it's no longer Star Wars, even if it has the Star Wars name. Next up, we have an infamous one, M. Night Shyamalan. We all know the trials and tribulations of his career. I mean, The Sixth Sense to me is an all-time movie. I absolutely love that one. And Unbreakable is another great film. And he did have a little bit of a resurgence with The Visit and then Split. He's all over the place. He's made one of my favorite So Bad It's Good movies of all time, The Happening. But the reason I would put him in no is because the one time he's worked with major franchise blockbuster was The Last Airbender. I'm sorry, M. Night. I enjoy your movies when you do them well. I even enjoy your movies when you don't do them well, but I don't think you should do Star Wars.
He's been pumping out stuff. He's in a really good place for his career, I'd say, but I don't think he should do anything with a blockbuster because that's how he'll take. Definitely no to Star Wars. Next up, we have Martin McDonough, who's done In Bruges and then Banshees and in Sharon. I mean, I think he's a great director. I love In Bruges. It's very dark, like sickly dark, like a lot of humor out of it. I just don't think stylistically he's a good fit.
I agree. I think In Bruges is a masterpiece, and that's his earliest movie. Three Billboards got him Oscar attention. Banshees got him Oscar attention, but I don't know if his original work would translate that well to Star Wars. So I'd say stylistically not a good fit as well. Next up, we got Mr. Blockbuster, Martin Scorsese, who loves making studio movies and franchises. He's just recently signed on to do Avengers, and then he's going to do Justice League after that. But when he's done with those, he might make a Star Wars movie. Jokes aside, I think it could work, but it won't ever happen in a million years. I think if you had to pick a major franchise, Star Wars might be the one that he would have a little more respect for, purely because George Lucas was a contemporary of his. They all came out of that film school generation in the early 70s, late 60s. I think it could work, but it won't ever happen.
I think that's a great place to put it. Could work, but won't ever happen. I don't know how you would translate it to Star Wars in New York and Star Wars. Next up, we have Matt Reeves. I think he's more than capable. I think he's a great fit. I just think that he's currently stuck on this really weird timeline with the DC universe. I don't know if he'd have time for Star Wars, still working on Batman 2 and 3. Right now, I think he's at the bottom bottom of a good fit and could happen.
Yeah, I agree. Like 2075, when he's done making the Batman 3, he'll do a great Star Wars movie one day. But right now, I think he's absolutely good fit and could happen because he's interested in franchise filmmaking. Next up, we have Matthew Vaughn. And Matthew Vaughn honestly would have been kind of top of the list 10 years ago of like people who would be really interesting to make a Star Wars movie. He has a distinct style. Still, maybe his best movie is X-Men First Class. He did a great job relaunching X-Men, and he's made some really interesting other fantasy movies like Stardust. I loved Kingsman 1. I thought that was a really fun movie. But it's just been recently he's not had a hit since Kingsman. I think before he would have been good fit and could happen. Right now, I would probably put him in not an exciting choice.
Yeah, he's definitely on the lower end of not an exciting choice for me, and it's mostly because of Kingsman 2. Next up, we have Michael Mann. I love Heat. Heat is one of my favorite movies of all time. He's a little out of his filmmaking prime. He hasn't really had any big successes recently, and unless he changes something up with Heat 2, unfortunately, not an exciting choice.
I would agree. It's really sad where his career has kind of fallen because he was such an exciting filmmaker in the late 80s and early 90s. I agree. Heat is an excellent movie, but recently he has not had a hit in over 10 years. Next up, we have Michael Bay. Michael Bay, obviously notorious for the five Transformers movies. He did Bad Boys 1 and 2. He's a controversial guy. Everything he does is Michael Bay. Michael Bay's movies just aren't very good. He's had the occasional decent movie recently, and they haven't quite been as bad as when he was making Transformers. I would say no for Michael Bay.
I also say no to Michael Bay. You know, it's a pretty unfortunate thing for him because he feels so controversial, but his crews love him. I don't think Star Wars needs more mess, so I would say no. Next up, we have Paul Thomas Anderson. He's got variety, but he's true indie director. I don't see ever happening for him. I don't think he's just stylistically a good. He can get like revolving doors of characters and jumping between storylines because he's an indie director that hasn't really shown any interest in doing anything but his own films. Not a good fit. So
Completely agree. Stylistically, not a good fit. Incredible director, but just makes no sense for Star Wars. Nothing he's ever made has screamed any form of blockbuster. But next up, we have somebody who definitely would have been on the brain for Star Wars 10, 15, 20 years ago, and that's Peter Jackson. And I think he's still on the brain. I think Peter Jackson could make a really cool Star Wars movie, a George Lucas esque filmmaker, in my opinion, somebody who likes to push the boundaries of VFX, somebody who really likes to dive all into the lore, into the story, and really build worlds. If he ever got a chance to do one, he has worked with Disney recently with the Beatles stuff that he's been overseeing. He decides to return to narrative filmmaking in a director role. I think he would be a good fit and it could happen.
I think good fit could happen is the right category to put him in. I mean, arguably, he is most famous for adaptation instead of original filmmaking. The fact that he is a strong adapter would be great because then he could pull stuff from books that all kind of have the same points, same sort of characters, and make something really awesome out of it. Still think he'd be good, just maybe more like middle of the pack for a good fit. Next up, we got Quentin Tarantino. No, stylistically, not a good fit. He's a guy who likes his extremes, right? But I don't see anything in those films that lines up with Star Wars.
Yeah, I completely agree. Stylistically, not a good fit. The fact that he has been connected to Star Trek in some capacity, I couldn't say it won't ever happen. Next up is Richard Linklater, and Richard Linklater is another one that I would say stylistically not a good fit. Somebody who's never really gone beyond kind of the upper budget indie scene. I love a lot of his movies. The Before trilogy is incredible to me. And Before Sunrise, I think that's a masterpiece. I just don't see anything in his career that would scream Star Wars.
I think it's actually could work, but won't ever happen. I'm a huge fan of Dazed and Confused. That's just one of my favorite films out there. I think his humor actually is perfect. That Texan swagger and then just making fun of situations and making fun of yourselves and just like laughing at some crazy random things happening. It is though, like you said, a bit of like a niche. Like he works in his lane. Probably won't ever happen, but if it does, I would be so happy.
I'll give you that one. I do think he could do it. I just think it's his career that makes it seem
Yeah.
like it would never happen, and stylistically, he wouldn't attempt it.
Next up, we have Ridley Scott, cinematic legend, you know, Alien, Blade Runner alone. He's someone that even if he doesn't necessarily wanna make multiple movies for a franchise, he can be like the plate setter. I say could work, but probably won't ever happen.
Whatever you think of every other Ridley Scott movie, he's made some of the greatest science fiction movies of all time. I think he would be somebody that I would at least be excited to see what he could do if he was hired to do a Star Wars movie. I would agree that it could work and won't ever happen. Next up, we have one of my top 3 favorite directors working today, and that is Mr. Robert Eggers, who just had Nosferatu come out. The Northman is a fantasy movie with kind of a horror edge, so fantasy gives me a little faith that he could do something like Star Wars. Northman and Nosferatu also working in a much bigger budget. I think he would do a great Star Wars movie, but with his recent comments about wanting to keep in horror, wanting to keep in period movies, I would say could work, but won't ever happen.
Yeah, this is a guy who says he doesn't even wanna see, like, a cell phone or anything in his movies or computer, so I think it could work, just won't ever happen. Next up are the Russo brothers, Joe and Anthony. I don't really get the criticisms that people have when it comes to the MCU stuff, at least. They know how to work in franchises and elevate franchise work. The Gray Man and some of their other stuff since, I'd put them somewhere in the middle of good fit, could happen.
I'd put them at the bottom of good fit could happen purely just because they haven't proven really that they can do anything in terms of film outside of the MCU. The positive is the MCU is, yes, working with Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios, but it's working with Disney, and Disney owns Star Wars as well. So there could be a nice little ecosystem in there where they're comfortable with the people they're working with if they were to do a Star Wars movie. And I think that could definitely elevate their game. Next up, we have Ryan Coogler. Ryan Coogler, one of the more interesting voices in filmmaking nowadays, and somebody who's done a variety of different films. Ryan Coogler would be a good fit, and it absolutely could happen. He has a relationship with Marvel. He's been a part of the Disney family. He's done big blockbuster. I'm looking forward to seeing him do more original stuff, but I would love it if Ryan Coogler was picked as a Star Wars director. I'd be very excited about that. He's done some great work.
Yeah, I think he shoots up to the top of a good fit and could happen. Like you said, I need to see a film outside of a franchise right now. I think Sinners, if it works, yeah, I think he's backed into a match made in heaven for me. Next up, we have Sam Raimi. He's someone who can handle a lot of franchises and franchises as big, if not bigger at different points of time than even Star Wars has been. So I just don't know if he's done a lot recently that I'm like a huge fan of. I did like Multiverse of Madness, but right now I think he's a little bit more on the lower end of could fit and could happen for me.
Yeah, I was gonna put him towards the top of not an exciting choice. I just think right now he hasn't done anything too unique in a while. He used to have such a unique voice, whether it be the Spider-Man trilogy, which has his stamp all over it, and then the Evil Dead trilogy. I'm okay with good fit and could happen, but I don't know how excited I would be truly if they announced Sam Raimi as a director. I think I'd be interested. Next up, we have Mr. Steven Spielberg, best friend of George Lucas. And obviously, Steven Spielberg has been a dream choice for Star Wars forever. I think it's a match made in heaven, not just because he and George Lucas are best friends. They know a lot about each other's filmmaking. They work directly on 4 Indiana Jones movies together. If you were to get a Lucas movie again, it would come in the form of like Steven Spielberg directing and George Lucas being some type of producer or advisor to it. I think it would be really kind of full circle if his final movie was a Star Wars movie and it was like episode 10 or something that just relaunched Star Wars and got us back to a great place in Star Wars, and it had Lucas on as a producer. I would say a match made in heaven.
Yep, straight to the top of the list of a match made in heaven for me. I think The Fablemans was a good return in form for him, just having potent filmmaking for him. I think he always elevates whatever he's given and whatever he's adapting and works with. So I would be super excited to have him, and I think it would be a nice like full circle moment. Next up, we have the Daniels, Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I think is pretty good, a little overrated, but I think I had a lot of fun with it. A lot of good messaging there. I don't have anything for or against them when it comes to Star Wars Skeleton Crew and what the work that was there. I love that it was a Neil episode. I'd say stylistically not a good fit, honestly, because I wasn't like blown away. I didn't really see a lot of style from them in Skeleton Crew.
I can understand where you're coming from, but I disagree. I think it's a good fit and could happen. And one of the things that I think is so cool about it, and one of the reasons I think they could be a good fit and absolutely could happen, not just that they worked with Star Wars before, but Everything Everywhere All at Once is an homage to like all of pop culture type of movies. Skeleton Crew is not really anything to indicate. I agree it's the worst episode of the show, but I don't think it's an indicator of whether they can handle Star Wars or not because it's somebody else's show. They're just putting it into action.
Okay, I'll give it to you.
Next up, we have Tim Burton, another legend. I have loved Tim Burton films since I was young. Recently, he hasn't had the best run of the last 5, 10 years, but kind of like Ridley Scott, he has the occasional hit, and he has worked with Disney plenty in the past. But when he's on the top of his game, I think Star Wars is something that's right up his alley, around the bottom of good fit and could happen.
Yeah, for me, he's like the top of not an exciting choice. I don't really feel like he's at the height of his powers. I don't think he's quite up to where he was before. So, all right. Well, next up, we have Wes Anderson. He's done some great films. His aesthetic is just not something I think matches with Star Wars. I like some of his camera work and all that. I just don't see him making a good Star Wars film. For me, somewhere near the bottom, stylistically, not a good fit.
Yeah, I agree. Stylistically, not a good fit. Although I think the one thing he could do if he was to do Star Wars would be an episode of Star Wars Visions. I think he could do a
Mm.
really fun animated episode of Star Wars Visions. And then next up, we have Yorgos Lanthimos. He makes really specific auteurist films, and I really enjoy his sensibilities and style. Poor Things last year was a great movie. The Favorite's a great movie. The Lobster's a great movie, but I think stylistically he's not a good fit for Star Wars.
Yeah, I don't think he's a good fit, and he's just very morbid about a lot of his storytelling too. And finally, that brings us to the one that Liam and I both already know is gonna be a no, Zack Snyder. He hasn't had a great film in years, and he messed up a lot of the DCEU. I think he's a pretty good dude, don't get me wrong. I just don't think he's got it for franchise filmmaking, honestly. Another automatic no.
Yeah, I would agree. No, and purely if you just look at that fact, right? Like, what's the average runtime of a Zack Snyder movie, especially in the last 10 years? Probably close to 3 hours. And Star Wars has never had a movie above like 235. I know this is unpopular with some groups of people who claim to be DC fans, but as a huge DC fan, I don't really like what Zack Snyder did at all with the DC universe. I'm still a Man of Steel defender. I think Man of Steel is a really solid movie. Maybe not the perfect Superman movie, but I think it's a really good movie. BVS, the Ultimate Edition, decent in parts, still doesn't fix all the dumbest stuff, which is the Martha stuff. And then Justice League, even if we don't want to blame him for the reshot version with Joss Whedon, even though his name's on that one, which is an awful movie, I didn't love the Snyder cut. It's okay at best. I'm glad I watched it. Probably never watch it again. And I did watch Rebel Moon 1 and 2, and that is the main reason I'm saying no. Lucasfilm already said no to him when he pitched Rebel Moon 1 and 2 as a Star Wars film. That is our list. Thank you so much for watching. You can check out our list here. We did just make some adjustments to it, but overall, it's the same list that you guys saw before. Here is a look at my list on the directors that I think could make a Star Wars movie. And here's a look at Sonic's. Make sure you like the video if you haven't. If you would like to do this tier list, the link will be in the description to the tier list. Share it with us on social media. Make sure you subscribe for more tier lists. We do one every single month. We also allow our patrons and YouTube members to pick the topics. So if you would like to be able to choose the tier list for as little as $1 a month, you can join our Patreon or YouTube membership program, and it allows you to get early access to videos as well as to pick the topic of the tier list every single month. So make sure you join. Thank you so much for watching this month's tier list, and we will see you guys all next time.